Hi, welcome back to the channel. I'm Chris. I'm a veteran with a disability rating. I'm a prior veteran service officer, and I'm a current VA claim trader. So for a direct service connection, a lot of you have heard of the three-legged stool. I'll just rehash it again for those a little unfamiliar. You need to have a disease, injury, or event in service. You need to have a current medical condition or lay symptoms of a medical condition. And then you need to have, in the middle, you need to have a connection between the two, what we call a nexus. So if you don't have all three of those, you don't get a service connection. Now, when it comes to a nexus for a direct service connection, all that you may have is your current medical condition or your current lay symptoms, and you see that you have something that you remember, or you have a copy of your service treatment records, and you know you had a certain injury in service, or you had a certain event that maybe is triggering a mental health condition you have now, and you're trying to ask the VA if they can make a connection for you so you can get disability compensation and, let's say, healthcare benefits. So for a direct service connection, we're definitely going to be looking at your service treatment records. So if you already have a copy of those, we've talked about how to get those with a FOIA, maybe after you filed your first claim, so that you've already looked through those and you know that you see those events in service. The longer that you spent in service, the more injuries, illnesses, and events are probably in service to help you connect with your claim. For a direct service connection, there needs to be a nexus made for you. Generally, we're sending that to an exam, and the examiner is telling us is at least as likely related and associated with that event in service. What we're doing is we're making sure we're just double checking their rationale. So that's how a direct service connection works. You're all pretty familiar with that, I think. So let's talk about secondary service connections. So with a secondary service connection, what you really need to show is that you have a primary service connection already, and that primary service connection is at least as likely contributing to a non-service connected condition that you've developed. So I'm not talking about a complication of a disease process you already have. So let's say you were in Vietnam and you have the Agent Orange presumptive and you have type 2 diabetes. If we send you to an exam and you end up with radiculopathy or retinopathy, those are those like an increased claim. Those are technically secondary. We'll view those as like similar to the disease that you already have. They'll get connected, and often they're not just added to that claim. They're allowed under the law to be separate conditions that you get percentages for. But for other things, let's say you have hypertension for many years, and you know you can get a presumption. You can get a presumption for hypertension, but now you've developed, after many years of hypertension, you've had 2 strokes, you've developed a certain heart condition. You could get those secondarily service connected, and maybe your family member, in this case, it's filing for dad or for mom. And so when you're going to file that, you want to file that on a secondary entitlement. And what you're arguing for is you're arguing for the VA to look at that initial claim that you are service connected for or should have been service connected for, and asking us really to send you to a VA examiner, or better, you've presented already a letter from your doctor that shows there's clearly evidence. And here's the articles from the NIH, are based on 30 years of physician experience. They know that these two are connected, and here's the studies that show that. And you give that when you go to the exam, it's going to make it a lot easier. So how do presumptive service connections work? The majority of my service connections are presumptive because I was in the Gulf War, and that means I was in the Middle East. There, as a result of the PACT Act, there's a whole host of conditions that got added to the presumptive list on the VA website as a result of that law, that show that if I can just prove to the VA, which I did obviously, that I was in the Southwest Theater of Operations, that if I develop conditions at any time after service, that those can easily be connected just by me going to an exam and them seeing in my medical records and confirming my diagnosis, or giving me a first-time diagnosis. For instance, sinusitis and rhinitis. I had been treated on and off for different allergy symptoms, but didn't really have a good paper trail in terms of my own records, in terms of getting treated. So when I went to the VA exam, I had diagnoses given me for both rhinitis and sinusitis. I'd had an MRI for potential TBI because I'd been near an explosion in the war. They found a mucus retention cyst in my sinuses and diagnosed me with sinusitis. Well, lo and behold, that's a separate condition that I can be rated for. And of course, allergies, I mean, I'm stuffed up all the time anyway, but I got connected for rhinitis separately from that. So that's how I got my rhinitis and sinusitis. I mean, I really just had some symptomology, but no prior diagnosis. So based on those, and of course, a bunch of other stuff, I got service connected for all those issues. So that's how presumptives work. The best scenario is you come in with some medical records showing you've got the diagnosis, and your VA examiner more or less is just going to confirm the diagnosis. But if all you have is lay symptoms, you could potentially still get the diagnosis at the exam. So we talked about direct, we've talked about secondary, and we've talked about presumptives. What's left? Well, we could talk about increase. Increase claims are really interesting. You don't really need much of a paper trail to file a claim for an increase. Anytime you file a claim for an increase, you're pretty much guaranteed an exam, because you're declaring, ideally, in a statement that my symptoms have gotten worse. We send you to a VA exam, and the VA examiner either confirms or doesn't confirm that your condition has gotten more severe. And if it's gotten more severe, you're going to get a higher rating for your claim. Let's talk about supplemental appeals. So if you've had prior denials for claims, and this is really important. So if you've had prior denials on a direct service connection, but now because of potential toxic exposures, and we've talked about this on the channel before, but if you've got a TARA that can be conceded now, asbestos, PFAS if you were in the Air Force and you worked around firefighting foam, or in the Navy, or any one of those TARA concessions, if we concede TARA now, you can get a new exam, and at that exam, now the medical practitioner is saying, is it at least as likely that your condition is related to TARA? And sometimes you wouldn't have got this on a direct basis because you don't have any proof that you had that illness in service, but almost all of us that were in the service have toxic exposures. Really, you're just trying to get the VA to concede those, and the best way to do that is to present your case to the VA when you're making your claim by listing out all your exposures to say you think there's a potential connection, and then let the VA determine, okay, we concede that based on our research, or based on the research you give us, or the examiner gives us research as well. But you're really not filing for an exposure, you're filing for a condition that relates to an exposure. So don't just put down Agent Orange on your application, or PFAS. Connect it to each individual contention that you think might be applicable. I want to talk about BDD claims briefly. A BDD claim is a pre-discharge claim. Veteran has to meet certain criteria. They have to file it within a certain timeline prior to their last 90 days of service. And they basically, it eases their burden of a Nexus, because basically if they've filled out their separation health assessment, I think they call that Part A, and they've gone to a Gen Med, and those confirm both the diagnosis and a condition. Really, as a result of that, we're just looking at severity. We're not even thinking about a Nexus, because there's already a Nexus, because it's being complained about and shown in service. It makes today's veterans have a lot easier time of service connecting their claims. So if you've been in the Marines or the Navy, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, Space Force, or even some public health officials have DD-214s now. But if you've been in one of those forms of service and you've had complaints in service, you need to be filing BDD claims, or at least filing a post-discharge claim within your first year of service, because then you don't have to have medical opinions attached to those. We just really need to see some evidence of it in service. And actually, if it's on your separation health assessment and it's at the Gen Med, I mean, you've met your burden of proof. All we're really doing is connecting you based on your severity. So for you guys that are filing BDDs, get on those BDDs. Make sure that you are listing all the conditions that you've suffered from on your separation health assessment. And at your Gen Med, they're going to either confirm or deny whether or not all those conditions match. But even if they don't mention every single thing you put on your separation health assessment, you're likely to get a service connection for most, if not all of those, because they were complained about in service. So just a little tip for you that are filing BDD claims. But note also with the BDD claim, that claim's kind of parked in the system once you file it, even though the whole point of those is so that you get a decision immediately after discharge and don't have to wait a year. But the truth is, we have to wait for your final DD-214. So after you file the claim, we're really just sending you letters saying we need that final discharge notice, and as soon as you get it, you got to get it to them, get it to the VA. So that's all for today. Just some quick tips to help you along the way, okay? Y'all take care.